Zoom. Welcome in, everybody, to our mid-season NCAA softball live. We're going to be joined by D1Softball's Jenna Becerra and Amanda Lorenz. We're going to be talking all of the storylines up until this point, some of the breakout freshman stars, top teams, top matchups, and so much more. For those just joining, I'm going to be bringing in Jenna Becerra and Amanda Lorenz from D1Softball. And here's Amanda. For those on YouTube, the holdup is just waiting for them to hop in on Instagram, and then we will get started. Becerra and Amanda Lorenz, we're going to be talking all of D1Softball.
Hello, thanks for having me.
All right, let me make sure. Hold on, some technical issues that I can hear you.
Hi, Amanda.
And we're waiting on Jenna Becerra to join as well. Okay, I might have you now, Amanda. Can you
hear me now?
I got you. All right.
Sure.
Thanks for joining. Okay. While we wait on Jenna to join, we're going to hop right into it. Can you give me your overall thoughts on this season so far?
Okay, I might
have gosh, it's been so exciting, right? I feel like we totally jumped into postseason form right away. It seemed like we have totally, it feels like we've gotten so many postseason games so early in the season, and I can't believe we're already midway through.
And there's Jenna. All right. So Jenna just joined on Instagram. For those on YouTube, she's probably been there the whole time. But Jenna, how about your overall thoughts on the season so far?
Oh my goodness. I think it's just been a wild ride. Every single year, I think it's going to be different. Like, I'm like, oh, there's no way it could live up to the previous year or anything that we've been used to, but somehow it always does. And there are always surprises along the way. So I just feel like I can't believe we're already in April and so much has happened, but so much is still left to happen at the same time.
I know. I feel like the season has been flying by, but like you said, we still have so many good matchups. Like, we're just into conference play. We had so many good non-conference tournaments, as we always do in softball, but now we're getting the great ones in the conference, which has been so fun.
There's nothing quite like conference, honestly, because the rivalries come out.
Exciting, right? I feel
there's so many things.
Did we lose Jenna? Amanda, you got her?
Conference tournament.
Yeah. Conference play. I mean, I think every conference has been so have their own storylines already this season, with the Pac-12 having their last year of softball in the Pac-12. So, it's a little bit of an edge, like who's going to win the last year of the Pac-12. And then there's some shakeup in the Big 12 with Oklahoma and Texas leaving next year to go to the SEC. So there's, some storylines there. And then obviously the SEC has been extremely competitive, and probably the most competitive in the last couple of years. So I've seen so many great things from those three conferences. It's been so competitive and so fun to watch.
Obviously the SEC has been
So Oklahoma is still the top team in the country, and the separation feels like it's getting a little bit bigger. There was that one week where we were like, oh, should we put Texas at number one? Should we put LSU at number one when Oklahoma lost their first game? But now it feels like they're the only team with one loss. All the other teams are notching more and more. But it does feel like the field is still stronger beneath the Sooners this year. You've got Tennessee, Duke, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma State, who just had some really big wins last week. What are your thoughts on this? Do you feel like the field is stronger underneath Oklahoma?
I definitely feel like the field is stronger. I think that we've seen that. There's been so many competitive games, but it really came down to Oklahoma wasn't the Oklahoma that we are used to seeing, right? Like they had some bumps. They weren't playing as well as we normally see them playing. They were still winning. It was just winning in the last inning versus a blowout in 5 innings. So I think that really came from not what other teams were doing, but what we were seeing in Oklahoma. And then now Oklahoma is back to themselves, and obviously they got those kinks out and feeling good about themselves again and playing like it. But the rest of the field is so competitive as well.
And then now Oklahoma is back to
we were blessed with so many amazing preseason matchups out of conference and like midweek matchups, like Texas going to LSU KU for a midweek, going to Florida State for a midweek, like just such elite competition that probably a preview to what postseason's going to look like. So much fun to watch.
All right, looks like we have Jenna back. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everybody. Jenna, you hear us?
Yes, sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm glad you're back. Amanda and I were just talking about Oklahoma being the top team, but just how strong the field is beneath them. Can you give your thoughts on that? And honestly, to add on to what Amanda just said, who can compete with Oklahoma?
Man, that's always been the question, right? It feels like we've been asking that same question for so long.
3 years.
Literally. But I think it's interesting because if we look at like our top 10, for example, that we have in D1 softball rankings, we see a bunch of teams that could compete, but it's like who can actually beat them, and not only beat them, but beat them twice. I think early season, you mentioned it earlier too, Michella, like when that blip happened where Texas was number 1 and Oklahoma wasn't for a hot second, that happened last year too, right? With UCLA at one point for 1 week, and then it went back to it. So we sort of saw the same thing. But during that time, people were talking about, they really think that Texas can compete with Oklahoma this year, just with some of the young talent that they have as well. And I think now that we're going to see that actually finally come to a head this weekend with them matching up, plus throw in the rivalry, plus throw in it's the last year of the Big 12 for those two. I just think anything can happen in moments like that.
I'm going to skip ahead because we are on the topic. What do you guys think of the matchup between Oklahoma and Texas? It's so highly anticipated. I'm so excited. I don't even know what to expect. I mean, Texas has a lot of really strong freshman players. Obviously, Tegan Kavan in the circle. You got Caden Henry, who has been blowing me away, but Oklahoma's got one of the most experienced lineups in the country.
Yeah, I think we talked about this on our podcast this week, just how excited we are for this matchup. And we even talked about this matchup early in the season, just about how exciting this matchup is going to be. Because I think this is the most elite Oklahoma versus Texas roster that we've seen. Just comparing the rosters, how talented they both are, like just they're going to be so competitive. And then there's the rivalry, right? Like there's so much on the table, like bragging rights, and oh my God, the fan bases are just insane. They take this so seriously. So there's just, it's always been a big rivalry, even when Texas was not as talented as they are this year. So I just can't imagine like how nervous and excited both teams are, and excited both teams are. I will not miss a pitch. Like I cannot wait to see the way that Texas will step up against Oklahoma, because this is their year, right? To take the series. It's at home. They're the most talented they've been in a long time. So I cannot wait to see how they compete. And Oklahoma, they're the vets, like they're supposed to win. So how to see them go into Austin and then to take 2. And I mean, I'm sure they have on their mind, they're expecting to sweep this weekend. I'm sure of it, And so it's just going to be so exciting. I cannot wait.
What are your thoughts, Jenna?
I mean, echo a lot of the same sentiments as Amanda, honestly. And yes, we did talk about this because we have been talking about it all year. But I would say that sometimes I think it's interesting too, because you mentioned it, Amanda, like Oklahoma, they have a ton of vets, obviously, that have played at the highest level. The senior class doesn't know what it's like to not win a national championship, which is kind of wild to think about, right?
Wild.
Some freshman talent, like in the circle for Texas, for example, times that can be tough because you're overwhelmed, but other times that can actually be an asset because you're not necessarily overthinking it too much, and maybe you don't let that sink in too much to where you're overthinking things. So from my perspective too, just the young talent versus some of the veterans too is going to be really interesting.
I know. I'm just so excited. I want to ask you guys predictions, but I don't want to, because then I'll have to give it to you and I have no idea. I almost feel like I would have to pick Oklahoma, but I think Texas is going to at least take 1. But then again, I wouldn't be surprised if Texas took 2. I wouldn't.
Yeah. Honestly, we did our picks this week too for D1 softball. Yeah. It's like,
how do I part of our job
every week? So hard. Like it's one of the hardest things I think I do for this job, to be honest. And I think, I did end up picking Oklahoma to win the series, but I do think it would be incredibly hard to sweep. I mean, if anyone can sweep Texas, it's probably Oklahoma. But at the same time, like, gosh, that would be so difficult to do within essentially 48 hours. Like these series are 3 days, but they're basically within 48 hours. That is tough.
And speaking of how tough it is to pick the outcomes of matchups, I wanted to just talk about in general how tough rankings have been this season. So I do my own Power 10 every Monday. I know you obviously have your D1 softball top 25, which is a lot more than the top 10 I do. So I'm always like, I'm closing the book after my top 10. I can't even imagine doing 11 through 15 and 15 through 25. It's just sickening to think about. But I know it just speaks to how much the game has been growing, but what can you guys say about how tough it's been?
It's okay. So I said the picks are the hardest every week. I think maybe I'll actually swap that out to say the top 25 is probably the hardest every week. But those are the two things where every week I'm like, oh, like kind of dreading it, but also loving it at the same time, right? I would say that it gets harder the further down the list you go. I mean, it's hard enough right now to iron out what the top 5 looks like, what the top 10 looks like, because you can make arguments for people who are just outside of those marks as well. But then as you keep going, it just gets like to look at like then 11 through 15, you're like, oh man, all right, well, who's looking like very solid right now? And then once you get down to the 2025 range, there are arguments for so many different teams out there, some of whom, are getting votes but aren't necessarily making it into the final calculations of our top 25 every week. And there's actually a longer list of those, at least from my perspective, than you would necessarily think at any given time. And we get questions every week about it for our podcast. Like, well, what about this team? What about that team? And it's like, man, it's difficult to narrow it down. It is extremely hard.
Let's talk about the top 5 or so for just a second. So I just pulled up D1 softball's top 25. You've got Oklahoma, Stanford at 2, Oklahoma State, Texas, and then Duke. Looking at my Power 10, I've got a different ordering, but same teams. I have Oklahoma, then Duke at 2, Georgia at 3. Again, this was before Georgia lost the series to Arkansas. So I do them on Mondays. That was before the rubber match on Monday night. So there was really nothing I could do there except for try and predict the future. And then I've got Tennessee at 4 and Oklahoma State at 5. But tell me about having Stanford all the way up at 2 when a lot of other publications have Stanford at like 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, I think this is one of the questions we got this week from fans about it. And I think it was sort of the question is, Stanford took the series against Arizona. It was a ranked series, but they did get run rolled in that second game. And do they look like a different team when Nigel Kennedy's in the circle versus when she's not? I mean, when you have such a high impact player like that, of course you look a little bit different, but how different, what's that gap? I would say that, and Amanda and I talked about this, it was actually kind of less about Stanford moving up this week and more about Texas dropping after dropping the series to Oklahoma State. And I think when that happens, you do have to slot people up, right? Like this is where the complications and the nuances come in with the rankings. So I think from that perspective, like even though they did get run rolled, it was the only time that that's happened this year was to a ranked team. 5 out of 6 of their losses are all to ranked teams. So you're just looking at the strength of schedule. And they are, top 5 in both our Diamond Sports rankings as well as RPI. I think they're number 2 in RPI, top 5 for Diamond Sports rankings from our perspective. So considering that strength of schedule piece as well, I think that's kind of where that slides in. But it can move really quickly. We've seen that all year round.
Okay, I'm looking right now. It looks like we have Jenny Finch wanting to join us. And I was just checking to make sure it was the real Jenny Finch.
I don't think it is.
It's not.
I was literally just sending that. They're trying to fool us. But little do you know, I'm a fangirl, and I know that's not her Instagram handle.
It's Jenny Finch with an underscore, but we cannot be fooled. It is the same picture and username aside from one, but oh well. All right. Well, we'll keep going. I love your take on Stanford up at number 2. I had them a little bit lower just because of Nigel Kennedy. Those, when she's not in the circle, those 5 losses that they do have. And I was just like, Tennessee almost on a 20-game win streak, finally snapped by Auburn after 20 games. Last time we saw them in person was at the Mary Nutter Collegiate Classic. And I was like, that's the last time they lost games. Tennessee's been really impressing me. I want to talk about Carlin Pickins for a second and just how much she has improved. Not that she wasn't an outstanding pitcher last season, but she's one of the best pitchers in the country right now. Amanda, Jenna, any takes on Pickins?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best pitchers in the country. It's been really fun to watch her compete. You know, she had the perfect game down in Palm Springs. And she's just really not missing a lot of spots. She's working the corners so well. I feel like adjusting also to umpire strike zones, like figuring out how far she can get and still get a strike. And that comes with maturity and knowing like, hey, I'm not going to give these hitters anything that they want. She's really staying on the two corners of the plate and doing such a good job. It also feels like she trusts her defense a lot. Like she's really not trying to get a million strikeouts. She's really just trying to get weak ground balls and put the ball in play and let her defense make some plays. But I've been really impressed with the way that she's stepped up in big moments and has been kind of the rock for that Tennessee team.
Well, hey, Jenna, you got more to add?
All I would add to that is like one of my favorite things to see, especially with pitchers, is as they mature in their careers, that composure piece in the circle, because it's not easy. Like we say all the time, like, you know, there's a circle around the pitcher's mound for a reason, because you are really at the center of everything. And I have seen that too. I agree with Amanda, like Carlin Pickins, just presence in the circle has been a little bit different. It's just been turned up a few notches, I think. And we had a chance to chat with her at Mary Nutter after that perfect game. And she just seemed so relaxed. And it's hard to be sort of pumped up and relaxed at the same time. But like, if you can find that balance, I think that's when the magic happens. And we've been seeing that from her.
And from such a young player, that's a perfect segue into what were some of your favorite performances so far up until this point? I have one on the top of my head. I feel like one of you is going to use it, but you can go ahead and start if you have it, and I'll just find a different one if it's what it was. Who wants to start?
I can start with a recent one that maybe flew under the radar a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, there are so many that we could pick, right? Like there have been outstanding softball games throughout this entire season, but I was very impressed. Speaking of the sort of like maturity and composure piece in the circle, this a couple weeks ago in the last series that I called with Haley Archer from Cal, she threw 291 pitches in 4 appearances within like 5 days. They ended up taking the series from Arizona, their first series of the Pac-12 that they won this year. And she had a couple complete games, including extra innings. And she was just so composed throughout that entire time. I just think that's just that dog mentality that she had. And those are the types of performances that I really love to see. So that one, I'm sure, flew under the radar a little bit, just out on the West Coast. But it was a really cool performance to watch.
Love that. Amanda?
Yeah, my favorite was probably Texas going into LSU and LSU winning, beating the Longhorns. I think that going in, I still probably wasn't on the LSU train, like thinking they were as good as maybe others thought. And wow, did they step up? They totally proved me wrong. And I was super impressed with the way that roster competed at home against a very good Texas team. And they did an amazing job. It was not even close.
Amanda, I'm not surprised that you weren't fully on the Tiger train as a former Gator. That's not really too crazy to hear. Okay, 2 performances I have, and they're more personal performances. We've just got to mention Nyjah Kennedy stepping into the batter's box and going yard and helping herself out. I mean, come on. I don't know that you can get better than that. Like, she is just so good, and she is proving time and time again that she's one of the best, if not the best players in the country. And getting to see her at the plate this season has been a treat, and going yard for her first career home run. Crazy. Were you there, Jenna?
I was not, which was, I was watching though with bated breath. And I will say this, I've seen her obviously take BP a million times. And she has so much power. Not surprising when it's somebody who throws in the 70s consistently, right? That she would have a lot of power. But it's just to see it translate into the game, and then to see sort of that Nyjah stomp that we all talk about in the circle when she gets fired up, to see that on the offensive side. Like, she was so excited for her team running around the bases. It's one of my favorite things. Like, anyone who knows me at all knows that I love pitchers who can hit, hitters who can pitch, however you want to say it. I just love when they can help themselves out. And that includes defensively too. And she makes some good plays in the circle as well. So
she really does. Another one, a pitcher that just had a crazy performance was Courtney White, fifth-year senior at Maryland. She pitched, gosh, she went the first game of the series against Penn State, went a complete game with 19 strikeouts. That's the most in the country in a single game so far this season. And then the next game, she came in relief. And then the third game, she went 11 innings with 17 strikeouts. I don't know how her arm is still on her body, but just wanted to shout out that performance too.
2 extra inning games in that series too. Like,
yes.
I think as both teams, as a group, played essentially, I think 28 innings in 3 games. So 4 games in 3, basically. So that's especially in the circle. So yes, that's a great call out.
And I've got a comment saying, give Duke some love. We haven't talked about Duke a ton. So let's talk about Duke. I mentioned that they are my number 2 team in my Power 10. I moved them up. What are they at? 3 losses now. I figured they just had that big, I think it was sweep. Am I right? It was a sweep over Virginia Tech. Let me double check on this.
I believe that's correct.
Before I say it. Yep. They swept number 15, Virginia Tech. Really impressed by Jayla Wright this season. Obviously, we knew Cassidy Curd was coming off of a really great season, her freshman year. And then for Jayla Wright to come back and just revamp her game. And we heard it from coach in all of the preseason reports that they were like, Jayla Wright's going to be a new pitcher this year, but I didn't really expect that she was going to be this great. And I think she's awesome. And Amina Vega has been incredible at the plate. Anna Gold has been awesome. They've got a really well-rounded team. And I think they have the pieces that can take them the distance to Oklahoma City, which is why I have them as my number 2 team right now.
Absolutely. And Claire Davidson hitting 440 on the year with 10 home runs. They've been super impressive. They've absolutely stepped up and have kind of established themselves as the team to beat in the ACC. Super excited because this is probably their year to make it to Oklahoma City. I know that they've been right there for the last couple of years, but and that's all led them to this year. So I'm really excited to see how they create this new standard for their new program and make that final step to their first time making it to Oklahoma City.
Yes, I remember us chatting in our sort of preseason preview.
Yeah.
A little bit ago. It feels like forever ago, but it really wasn't that long ago at the same time. But Duke was one of the teams that I thought could make it into the top 4 in the Women's College World Series, or even just get to the Women's College World Series, because we've talked about how Florida State has set that standard in terms of winning the national championship for the first time for the ACC. And I just think Duke has started to rise to the top of that conference. And yes, +1 to Jayla Wright, because I think she's been so fun to watch this year. And I'm really excited to see what they end up doing when it matters most in the postseason.
Agreed. So there's some love to Duke. My next question for the 2 of you: what have been some of the biggest surprises this season? Think back to where we were previewing the year. What has really shocked you? It could be a team that was underrated and is now doing really well, or vice versa. Amanda, you want to start, or Jenna?
Yeah, I think the thing that honestly has shocked me the most is Florida's success. I mean, they had zero returning pitchers. I know that they had the number 1 recruiting class coming in, but I wasn't expecting these freshmen to walk into the SEC and perform as well as they have been performing. I mean, absolutely performing like veterans, going in to Tuscaloosa, their first SEC series, which is a really hard place to play, and looking like they've been there before, which is really hard because you can't mimic that in practice or any travel ball game. So I think that I'm really, really impressed and surprised by Florida. They had a lot of turnover, no returning pitchers, brand new pitching coach, Francesca Anea is new on staff. So just a lot of new faces, and they've done so amazing rising up to the standard that is Florida softball. And then I'll say my other surprise was LSU. If I was I don't vote on rankings because they're too hard. So I don't, but if I was making a top 10, like LSU wouldn't have even been in my top 10. And wow, they
have been so fun to watch, so competitive,
like pitching great, playing great defense, timely hitting, like diving all over the place in the outfield. Like they've just been so fun to watch. So those are probably my 2 surprises of the year.
How about you, Jenna?
I would add Mizzou as well. I mean, they just got off to such a hot start. Like, I don't think that was necessarily on my radar right away. Like 5-0, I think the first weekend they came out strong, and they've been really just rising in the rankings and staying there really steadily. So I think that's one of the teams that I've been like, wow, this has been really, really fun to watch. Not necessarily shocked that they can compete. That's not necessarily the surprise, but just to get the results as well. Like, getting consistent results is hard. So I think they, right off the bat, were one of those teams for me.
That leads me into, well, Amanda talking about Florida and all the new faces leads me to asking about freshman breakout stars. So I just actually did a video on this for NCAA softball. And when I was doing my research, oh my gosh, I literally had to write down like 40 names and all of their stats. And I was like, how is this even possible? I mean, I have like 30 plus girls who are hitting over 400 with like 6+ home runs or like pitching. Oh my gosh, it's just insane. And I was like, how am I going to leave anybody off this list? And how are there so many freshmen that are so good? So which freshmen have impressed you the most? Amanda, I know we talked about the Florida freshmen. You got Keegan Rothrock, Ava Brown, even Olivia Miller. Who else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they were on my list for sure, but I'm a huge fan of Ella Parker. She's done amazing in that Oklahoma lineup, looking like a veteran, hitting 415, 7 doubles, and 6 home runs on the year. Oklahoma has like seven people hitting over 400, which is just stupid. And then I've been pretty vocal about this on our podcast, but Reagan Shockey from Arizona leading their squad with a 415 average. She's been amazing in center field. She's been so fun to watch. And also Tegan Vaughn from Texas. Those are probably my three, other than Ava Brown and Keegan Rothrock. Those are my top 5 as of right now.
Okay, Jenna, you get to just continue the list, and there's about 50 more, so shouldn't be too hard.
I just want to reinforce Reagan Shockey too, because I got to see her play in person recently as well. Like, it being in the top 5 in batting average in the Pac-12 as a true freshman, not among freshmen, as a true freshman among everyone in the Pac-12. Yeah. Is really impressive. And I just think that that's a team that can hit. So for her to be in the upper parts of the lineup, just immediate impact the way she's been, it's been fun to watch, especially with a lot of speed, right? Like, I love seeing, you can see a clear connection between Caitlin Lowe, one of the greatest slappers of all time, right? And then you see some people like Reagan Shockey who are these triple threats, and it's really throughout their lineup too. So I just really wanted to reinforce that, because there's so many others as well. I think one freshman to watch too, and she's somebody that we talked about leading into the season, is Caitlin Terry from UCLA, KT. There's been, it's not as consistent probably as she would have liked, but when she's had those big moments, it's been really, really cool to watch. And I think she throws really hard too. She can also hit. We haven't seen that as much. But you know, if we're on the same sort of path with the Nigel Kennedy, where maybe at some point she gets to do that at her career. And that's such a legacy at UCLA too, to be pitchers who hit. I played against Megan Langenfeld, and it felt like she single-handedly beat us and won the World Series.
Like crazy.
Yeah.
No, she actually did that year. Like, she completely won the World Series. It was just crazy. All right. Since I have the list in front of me, I'm going to name a few more. Bridget Namath, Penn State.
Yep.
A 1.07 ERA, over 78 innings pitched, and 78 strikeouts. She's crazy good in the circle, and nobody would have expected that with a freshman arm at Penn State. Jason E. Beecham at Florida State. Hitting what, 475, maybe more, 7 home runs, probably over 30 RBI. I'm so impressed by her, and I love watching her play. I've been having a lot of fun. I know Florida State fell off a little bit, but you got to think the future's bright. They've got some good freshmen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. A few more I have before we move on. You mentioned Caitlin Terry. Let's see. Who else do we have on this list? Caden Henry, we talked about. You mentioned Ella Parker. I mean, Cassidy Pickering. She's just getting what, another freshman? She's hitting close to 400, over a 1.1 OPS. It's just crazy. It's like she doesn't even get talked about because Ella Parker is hitting 436. There's so many good freshmen. The future is so bright.
Yes.
Okay. Let's keep it moving. And I have some more questions for everybody and predictions. I did get a question in the comments about Washington. Washington, and Jenna, I'll let you speak to this first since you heavily cover the Pac-12 over at Stanford. They've been like riding in the 8-9, 7-8-9 spot in the rankings all season. And I think it's easy to overlook a team like that is just sitting there in the top 10. But what do you think?
Yeah, when they're actually able to be steady, right? There's almost less to talk about because they're consistent, if that makes sense. And it's strange when you think of it that way. But I just think, Ruby Malin had such a great freshman year. So coming into this year, I'm not surprised to see her do what she's been doing in the circle. And I do think like between her coming from the right side, having that great velocity, and then you have a Lindsay Lopez coming from the left, a little bit slower, but kind of spinny, right? Like they're just such a good complement to each other in the circle. And Riley Holtorf has been so fun to watch. I remember watching her came on the scene and I was like, she's really, I think she's someone to keep our eye on, and she has just blossomed so wonderfully, especially after, they lost Bailey Klingler, right? Like Sammy Reynolds is still on staff, but like she's not in uniform anymore. And so that was part of the question this year is like, how are they going to sort of fill those gaps? And I think people have really stepped up, and it's been really fun to watch the Huskies.
Anything to add, Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, agreed. I think also you have Kinsey Fiedler, who's leading their team with a 391 average, who wasn't even an everyday player last year. Wow, like absolutely stepping up and creating a new like kind of normal for her, getting back in the lineup every single day. And obviously she's worked really hard in the off season, and it's paying off, which is so fun to see a player like that. She was more of an everyday player, like probably her freshman year. And so it was a little bit different last year. She's absolutely excelled, has been leading their team for a while. I was going to say Riley Holtorf as well. I'm a big fan of her. I think that she is like the typical Washington player. Like it looks like a Sis Bates lookalike over there. Like lookalike over there. Like they just like keep recruiting those little blonde girls with a lot of energy that can do some really cool things. And then I love Jillian Solis too. And then I love Jillian from San Diego State with her hitting coach Victoria Hayward. She's competing in the Pac-12, a bigger conference than she was at before, and making her presence known. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Ruby Malin as well.
Agreed on all of that. Literally no notes. I couldn't add anything. Okay. We're going to do something fun now. It's not going to be easy, but since we are at the midseason point, I think it would be fun to give out some midseason awards. So we're each going to pick our midseason, if the season ended right now, player of the year, pitcher of the year, and freshman of the year, which is so hard. Who wants to start?
I'll be brave and start.
Okay, you're very brave, Amanda.
Yeah, this was hard too. So I really could give like 2 or 3 names for each category, honestly.
Agreed.
But for my player of the year, I'm going to go with Tiare Jennings. She's been so consistent and kind of like that silent assassin. Just like her presence is always known, but she just kind of just stays. She stays so consistent, kind of what you're talking about with Washington. Like there's not a lot to talk about because she just stays the same. I feel that way with Tiare. Like Charity has 15 home runs on the year, leading the team in average. Like, I mean, Jada's leading. She's right behind Jada in average, but just she's so elite. So Tiare is my midseason player of the year. My pitcher of the year is going to Nyjah Kennedy from Stanford. I think her ERA right now is 0.52. I got to see her for the first time in person in Clearwater, and I was so impressed. Like she is the real deal. And at the end of the game in the 7th inning, she was still hitting 72, and her rise ball was jumping like just like it did in the first inning, which is so impressive. And then my freshman of the year, I'm going to go with Keegan Rothrock just because of the impact that she's had for the Gators. Like their number of wins and losses would look much different if she was not impacting the game in the circle. And she's had such an impact on that team. So I'm going to go with Keegan Rothrock for my freshman of the year.
Those are such good picks. I'm like, should I just change mine out of the blue? Okay, Jenna, go ahead with yours.
Oh, I sort of feel the same way because for me, player of the year, I was also going to go with Tiare Jennings. And even just getting to see her and her family, when we were down in Palm Springs at Mary Nutter, we partnered with Players Collective, which is her agency, and her her entire family was there. It's not just about her personal stuff, but to see a player that good, who she's slugging 1,000 right now at this point in the season, right? Like sometimes you see inflated numbers early on because the sample size is small, but at this point in the season, you're slugging 1,000. It's insane. But then when you see the person behind the player as well, just seeing her entire family there, and then her sister plays for San Diego too, and they had like the Oklahoma San Diego combo shirts and things. You're just like, it makes it easy to root for them on top of their talent. So that would be my pick. Pitcher of the year too. I was going to say Nigel Kennedy. It's hard not to, right? I mean,
yeah, I don't think you can.
But it's tough. She leads the nation in ERA. She leads the nation in strikeouts. She leads the nation in terms of lowest hits allowed per 7 innings too. So it's like all these huge categories that you would look for a pitcher. She's either leading or like in the top 5 in the country. So it's really difficult not to select her. And I think just from the perspective of her longevity too that we've seen this season. So last year, she actually in the end wasn't an All-American because she didn't reach the 100 inning minimum that you have to pitch to be eligible, which is insane. National Freshman of the Year, right? But didn't technically get that All-American status. This year, she's already passed the triple-digit mark. We're safe in that regard. But we've gotten to see her more in conference, and we're going to so far than we did last year too. So I think that has been fun too. You always are curious how people are going to respond in their sophomore year after success, not just after like a tough freshman year, but after a successful freshman year as well, when people have more film and data on you and things. And she's just been it's only gotten better watching her.
And then your freshman.
Yes, for freshman of the year, I think I'm going to go Tegan Cavan from Texas. I know another one right in the circle, but I just think to have an immediate impact the way she has when you come in like that to me is exactly what we're looking for a freshman of the year. And again, a Texas team where people are talking about like maybe they can beat an Oklahoma team, and that's been a couple years, right, since that's really been a topic in that way. And I think she's part of the reason why. So I would say that'll be my pick. So I guess I mixed up one of them from what Amanda chose.
Oh, and I guess I'm going to have to switch it up just so that we're not all the same. But I mean, those were my picks. I was going to Tiare Jennings. I don't know that you can argue it right now. I mean, at the beginning of the season, I think all heads were turning towards Reese Atwood at Texas when she was just had these insane numbers to start the season. But now that the numbers have settled a little bit, I mean, Tiare is just emerging in every single offensive category. And, having watched her play on the biggest of stages, I don't know that there's any better hitter in the country. I mean, she's just a true one of the best hitters I've ever seen in college softball. And I haven't been obviously watching it years and years before, but she is just an insane hitter. Gosh, it's hard to get her out. So you just got to go with Jennings. Reese Atwood was making a run. Same thing, Nigel Kennedy. I'm not even going to talk again because we already said it, and we don't need to say it again. Nigel Kennedy has got to be the best pitcher in the country. To switch it up from Tegan Cavan and Rothrock, I'll give it to Bridget Nemeth for Freshman of the Year. Again, another one in the circle, a 1.07 ERA. And she'll probably win Big Ten Freshman and probably also Big Ten Pitcher of the Year. So those will be my mid-season awards. All right, we're getting towards the end here, so I'm going to open it up to questions. Feel free to drop questions in the comments, and we will get to them now. I have a few that people left on Instagram, so let's get to those. Okay, we already touched on this a little bit, but a question mostly for Amanda. Do you think that Florida's offense has really improved?
Oh, absolutely. Right. Like, I mean, the proof is in the numbers and what they've been able to do this year, and just their depth 1 to 9. It's not just Skylar Wallace that we're looking toward anymore. Jossie Erickson has had an unreal impact, both at the plate and behind the plate, throwing runners out. I feel like every time a runner tries to attempt, she's throwing them out. But absolutely, I mean, it's been so much more fun. They've been so much more competitive, throwing up way more runs than their batting averages.
All right, another question. What do we think of Clemson? Jenna, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think we had really high hopes for Clemson, right, coming into this season. And we talked about Duke earlier being one of those teams that like, hey, are they going to get over the hump to make it to the series? We were having those conversations about Clemson as well. And it's hard not to, right, when you have the reigning National Player of the Year in Valerie Cagle, who contributes on both sides of the ball, in the circle and offensively. But I think, they've had some tough losses. And they just dropped a midweek. There's been a little bit of midweek madness, actually, in a general sense, recently.
Yeah.
I think just speaks to the parity and the growth that we're seeing in college softball. I think they're going to have to make some adjustments because at first I feel like people were looking at Florida State after last year's performance, making it to the World Series finals as sort of the leader, Duke right there too, but Clemson really was one of the other ones. And I think it's that point in the season where, to me, it's a pivoting moment because either teams can take it and run with it and they start to like build up to peak at the right time in the postseason. A good example of that last year would have been like a Utah, right? Or, can start to get a little bit tired and start to kind of think a little bit too much and get a little bit overwhelmed. And maybe it starts to kind of go off the rails a little bit. So I think this is a really key moment for Clemson, actually, because they have the tools. They have all the pieces. It's just putting it all together, which is a lot easier said than done, right? Because it's pitching, hitting, fielding, like everything has to be clicking, which is why it's so impressive when teams do have all those things together.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. All right, here's another question. Any concerns with Texas's pitching staff? We talked a lot about Tegan Cavan and how much of an impact she's been in her freshman season. Do we have any concerns, especially outside of Cavan?
I think that the only concern me going into the weekend for them is like just how big of a series it is. And Tegan's kind of the one that they're going to look to really perform. And that's a lot for a freshman, her first Red River rivalry. It's like such a tongue twister to say. But I think that's probably the only concern is the lack of experience, even though she has not performed in a way that would make me say that. I just feel like this means a little bit more and it's going to be a little bit more heightened. There's going to be a lot of emotions, a lot of fans. It's going to be loud and super exciting. So I would say that would be the only thing. Like, I just really hope she can control her emotions, continue to do what she does and perform the way that she's been performing all year.
I like what you did there, Amanda. It just is more. Is that a little nod to the move to the SEC?
And like, they are soon joining. So they understand like now they've only had one series that just means more. Now they're going to have so many throughout the year,
Exactly.
It is crazy to think of the conference realignment and the conversations we're going to be having next year with the Big Ten turning into a completely different conference with UCLA. I mean, it's going to be so weird. Texas, Oklahoma, and the SEC. I mean, gosh, excited for that. Here's a little preview for next year's season preview. We'll be talking about conference realignment. Okay. Very last question. We get this again for the past 3 years. Can OU four-peat? I do think that they can, and it would be crazy, but it's just yes or no. What do you guys think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, why not? I think that especially their senior leaderships, like Jenna had said earlier, they don't know what it's like to not win a national championship, which is wild. Like so many people don't even win one and they have the opportunity to walk away with 4. Absolutely. I think that they're absolutely the favorite entering the second half of the season. It's why not? It's going to be up to them. Their limit is their biggest competition is themselves at this point.
Yeah. The limit does not exist. I just watched the Mean Girls musical.
Mean Girls.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly describes them. No, I'm with you, Amanda. I mean, the short answer is yes, of course they can. Everything has to kind of align not perfectly, but near perfectly, right? For it to happen, but they've shown that they can do that. I think the biggest thing for me, especially the last couple of years with them, has been just their response to things. The fact that you think, oh no, we're in the bottom of the 6th or whatever inning really late in the game and Oklahoma might be losing right here. And then they don't. A Kinsey Hansen walk-off comes or someone else steps up because everyone 1 through 9 can step up in that way. So they don't let the pressure overwhelm them. And then when they do slip up, when they do actually lose for once in life, they respond in a way strong. That happened last year when they lost to Baylor. It happened this year when they lost to Louisiana, and to be able to do that and just course correct is a lot harder than they make it look. And I think that is one of the difference makers for them.
Yeah, last thing I'll add to that before we head out, we got a question saying, what is Oklahoma's secret sauce anyways? And I mean, you want to say it's not even just the insane talent that they have, because obviously they have the most talented players in the country, but you can always beat talent. The difference, like Jenna just said, is their ability to respond and perform under pressure. And that's just what sets them apart from everyone else. And I remember asking Patty Gasso after, I don't know if it was their second or third national championship, I was like, how does the moment not get too big for your players? And she was like, I don't even know, because they just do it. And I don't do anything different. They just go out there and they just get fire in their eyes and they respond no matter what the situation is. And I think that's what makes you so elite in sports is, they're not only the best team, but they're the best team all the time. They just respond all the time on any given night. So yes, short answer to that question. OU can four-peat. I think that'll wrap us up on our midseason breakdown. Thank you both so much for joining me. Again, everybody who's tuning in, it's Amanda Lorenz and Jenna Becerra from D1Softball. We will be doing this again as we get closer to the postseason and the College World Series. So make sure you join us then. But guys, thank you so much for breaking it down. It's so much fun.
Thanks for having us. This was fun.
Always the best.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.